Good morning, y'all, in the West Coast and afternoon on the East Coast. I would like to welcome everybody tuning with us today for our virtual ALC panel brain trust called Tequity, Policy, Practice, and Procedure. My name is AJ Malikdam. I'm the Director of Operations to Congressman G.K. Butterfield, who represents North Carolina's 1st Congressional District. First off, I would like to say that I hope everyone's doing well today and staying safe through this pandemic. Just want to give a quick thanks to our honorary co-host, Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California, and my boss, Mr. Butterfield, for joining us today via video remarks. And special shout out to Ms. Lee's Deputy Chief of Staff, Kayla Williams, who I've been working with on this as well. I also want to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, Apple. Shout out to Rob Harris, who's been working tirelessly on this session. So I want to give you a shout out there for presenting our virtual session today. We will have Apple's VP for Environment, Policy, and Social Initiatives, Lisa Jackson, on to provide special video remarks in a few minutes. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, to take us off, I have a wonderful friend of all of ours, Dr. NICOL Turner-Lee. She's the director of the Center for Technology and Innovation and a senior fellow for governance studies at the Brookings Institution. So here you go, Dr. NICOL Turner-Lee, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Well, thank you so much, AJ. You know, every time you call, I am always here to answer because I started in your office when I first came to DC, not as a worker, but the Honorable G.K. Butterfield really took on me as a special project, I think, when I was actually trying to get into the tech space. With that being said, I'm really excited about this panel for a couple of reasons. One, we have to think about where we are right now, folks. COVID has just really determined that digital is the new normal. And if digital is the new normal and people are going to have to shift to a digital space versus an analog space, then guess what? We've got to pay attention. And part of paying attention means that we have equitable access in terms of broadband deployment and equitable access when it comes to C-suite office as well as workers. I'm really excited. Shameless plug, I'm writing a book on this. It'll be out later this fall. But the key thing is tech equity is important to talk about. So this conversation is not only timely, but it's also one that I think all of you that are watching as part of the ALC, you need to be at. So I'm actually happy to be the host for this today. And so before we get started, I'm really excited to introduce the two co-hosts of this session today, Representative Barbara Lee, who is out of California, and Representative G.K. Butterfield out of North Carolina. Both of them are esteemed members of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and we're going to hear from them first as the co-hosts, and they'll be followed by remarks from our sponsor of this session, Lisa Jackson from Apple. So let's start with Representative Barbara Lee.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Dr. Lee. First, I'd like to acknowledge and thank my colleague and good friend, Congressman G.K. Butterfield. It's truly an honor to serve with him as co-chair of CBC Tech 2025 initiative. And I'd just like to thank him because we started this initiative during his really very historic leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus. Thank you to our sponsor, Apple, my longtime friend and a phenomenal Black woman, Lisa Jackson, and CBCF for providing the forum to have this badly needed conversation. Finally, I'd like to thank our moderator, Dr. Turner-Lee, and our esteemed panelists, ALISHA, Lynn, Spencer, and Veronica, for their commitment to equity in tech. Now, the COVID pandemic has thrown millions of individuals out of work, and those most vulnerable to the volatility in the labor market were people of color, and of course, specifically African Americans. Yet growth in the technology industry has remained resilient, as many of you may have guessed, though Black participation once again is lacking. Although African Americans represent 12% of the United States population, Black tech professionals only make up 5% of the tech workforce, only 1% of tech industry founders, and only 3% of tech leadership. This is a shame and disgrace. From boardrooms to entry-level coders to African American suppliers, African Americans are grossly underrepresented at every level of the tech sector. Make no mistake, changing this dynamic, it's a moral and economic imperative. It's an issue of racial justice and equity. Increasing Black representation is only a small part of our efforts with CBC Tech 2025. We want to support training and mentorship programs that help Black professionals not only exist, but thrive in this sector. 62% of Black STEM workers report experiencing racial discrimination at work. We need to create a culture and environment that invests in human capital and is sensitive to the experiences of Black employees. Across industries, we are seeing a push towards automation and a growing reliance on artificial intelligence. Our community must be prepared for this shift in labor, where technology and human labor work hand in hand. That's why I've been a longtime supporter and champion of expanding access to STEM education for the Black community, and have reintroduced my bill, the Computer Science for All Act, which of course we worked with President Obama during his great presidency to initiate. A quality, universal, and culturally competent STEM education is essential to building a robust talent pipeline and preparing us for the future of work. In closing, I would just like to underscore the importance of working together, both public and private sectors, to improve Black representation and create an environment that supports the recruitment and retention of Black tech professionals. Thank you again. Thanks to all. And I look forward to the discussion. And just remember, we're going to move forward. This is an issue of racial justice and racial equity.
Thank you so much, Representative, for those remarks. I mean, I know how important this is to you. And as another lead to a lead, we've got to stay in this game because there's so much more work to do. Now we're going to hear from Representative G.K. Butterfield out of North Carolina.
Let me welcome all of you to today's special CBCF Annual Legislative Conference virtual panel discussion. I am U.S. Congressman G.K. Butterfield, representing North Carolina's 1st District. I am proud to serve, along with my colleague, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, as co-chair of the CBC's Tech 2025 initiative. First of all, let me just take a moment to thank several individuals who, without their cooperation today, would not be possible. First of all, thank you to the CBC Foundation. The Congressional Black Caucus Foundation has been in existence for 50 long years. It has done great work down through the years, and the legacy of the CBC Foundation continues. Under the leadership of Tanya Veazey and the Board of Directors, thank all of you for making this week happen. To my good friend Lisa Jackson from Apple Corporation. Lisa and I have developed a very strong bond of friendship that began when she was EPA Administrator under President Barack Obama. But now Lisa is the Vice President for Environment, Policy, and Social Initiatives with Apple. Thank you, Lisa, for the incredible work that you do, not just for Apple, but what you do for African Americans who have an interest in technology and related subjects. Thank you. To the moderator for today, NICOL Turner-Lee. I met Dr. NICOL Turner-Lee when I first came to Congress some years ago. She has been nothing but a stalwart. She's been a forceful leader in this space. NICOL is now the senior fellow of the Brookings Institution. Thank you, NICOL, for joining us today, and thank you for being our moderator today. And to the panelists, ALISHA Johnson from Apple, Lynn Stanfield from Apple. Both of you are incredible individuals. I have read your bios and just really appreciate your work. And to Dr. Spencer Overton. Spencer is also a great friend that predates my service here in Congress. Spencer has been on the battlefield for a very long time, and you're continuing, Spencer, to do great work at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. You are certainly the president of this great organization, and I look forward to continuing to work with you as we try to knock down barriers both inside and outside of government. And finally, to Veronica Nelson. Veronica is the Executive Director for Advancing Minorities' Interests in Engineering. Thank you, Veronica, for joining us today. My friends, today's discussion will surround the successes and challenges of outreach, recruitment, hiring and retention of Black students into the tech industry. The discussion today will emphasize the importance of organizations playing a vital role in creating a robust pipeline from the classroom to hiring, especially in our communities where the disparities are all too prominent. Racial minorities and women continue to be underrepresented in the tech industry. Our 5-year report, which we released earlier this year, indicates that progress is unacceptably low. Yes, there is some progress, but it is unacceptable. The CBC has renewed its focus on ensuring that tech companies not only hire diverse candidates for entry-level and leadership positions, but also invest in Black and brown-owned companies that will further reflect the nation's diversity. Since the start of Tech 2025 back in 2015, the CBC has met with leading technology companies. We've met with them face to face. We've met with them to develop solutions around our initiative's core mission and our principles. Our members understand that each organization, each technology company requires a unique approach to increasing inclusion and diversity, but we need to move the needle in the right direction. Recently, Tech 2025 convened its inaugural unconference, bringing together individuals across the public, nonprofit, corporate, and academic sectors to address specific areas of concern, determine the barriers that cause those challenges, and figure out ways to rectify the continuing lack of diversity in tech. And so I'm excited today to hear the expert insights of our panelists, and I look forward to pursuing continued efforts of increasing African American representation at every single level of the technology industry. Thank all of you for joining us today.
As you would expect, Congressman Butterfield is also on point when it comes to talking about tech equity, particularly as he has engineered this panel and other efforts as well with the other congressmen. Now, I'm actually very happy to introduce somebody who's no stranger to the DC area, and that would be Lisa Jackson. Many of us knew her, admire her from her previous work in the previous administration, and now she has been leading for quite some time now Apple's environmental policy and social initiatives area as its vice president. So as one of the hosts of this particular panel, let's hear from Lisa Jackson.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for that very kind introduction and for the critically important work you are doing to increase access to technology. And tremendous thanks to my friends, Congresswoman Lee and Congressman Butterfield, for hosting this event and inviting Apple to join. I think we've all gotten used to these virtual conversations, but I have to say, I really wish this one was in person. It's always so enriching when we gather together. I mean, last time we hosted a CBC party in person, we brought Belle Biv DeVoe. So here's hoping we can get back to that type of convening very soon. Let me also say how much I appreciate your bringing us into this conversation. At Apple, we've made racial equity and justice a central part of our mission. Across our company, we have strengthened our commitment to diversity and inclusivity, and I'm proud to oversee our more than $100 million initiative to invest in advancing equity and justice in education, the criminal justice system, and the economy. Part of what we're trying to do here is create a model of good corporate citizenship on these issues that is defined by action and impact. We've gone well beyond just acknowledging systemic racism. We're taking meaningful and far-reaching steps to do something about it. I wouldn't be here if it were any other way. We're being very targeted in our approach, identifying areas where Apple's expertise intersects with racial equity and justice issues. As an example, we know a thing or two about what it takes to scale a successful company. So one of the things we've done is establish an entrepreneur camp for Black developers and founders. We also created an impact accelerator that invests in Black and brown businesses that are on the front lines of environmental innovation. And I was really excited last week to announce that we're investing another $30 million into HBCUs, HSIs, community colleges, and key organizations to expand on this work. In a moment, you're going to hear from a great group of panelists, including Lynn Stanfield and ALISHA Johnson from Apple. They'll share a bit more on what we're doing and how we're doing it. For now, let me just say that we're going to keep fighting, keep investing, keep driving changes within our spheres of influence. And I know the Congressional Black Caucus is going to do the same. So I want to close by thanking you for everything you do. We need your leadership now more than ever, and we're committed to being partners with you on that journey, now and in the future. Take care, everyone, and I really hope to see you soon.
As you can hear from all of the remarks from our distinguished host as well as sponsor, that we've got a lot of work to do. And so the next part of this conversation is really going to delve into what that work looks like. And I'm really happy because we not only have my dear friend Spencer Overton, I'm an alum of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, but we have folks who are from Apple who are putting their feet in the ground to get this work done. So I'm happy for the remainder of the panel to really have a conversation that not only exposes you to the work that they're doing, but also allows us to have a conversation around what needs to happen next to guarantee tech equity. Let me go ahead and provide some formal introduction, and that way they will actually speak for about 3 to 5 minutes with some opening remarks, and then I'll come on back and ask a couple of questions before we wrap up this session. We are joined today by ALISHA Johnson, who's the program lead at Apple for the Racial Equity and Justice Initiative. Thanks, ALISHA, for joining us. She will be followed by Lynn Stanfield, who's External Relations for Inclusion and Diversity at Apple. Veronica Nelson, who is the Executive Director of Advancing Minorities' Interest in Engineering, AMY, and Spencer Overton, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, the only think tank focused on African Americans and other people of color here in the Washington, D.C. area. So we're going to start out with you, ALISHA. Why don't you give us some remarks? I mean, you know the scope of the panel, but we'd love to hear more about what you do in your role at Apple, and of course, expand upon what your responsibilities are as well.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you to all of you. It's such an honor to be a part of this amazing panel with such esteemed experts in the space who are all aligned around this critical mission. And of course, you just heard recently from our Vice President, Lisa Jackson, on the critical importance of this work at Apple. As Nicole mentioned, I lead Apple's Racial Equity and Justice Initiative, which we launched in June of 2020. And it was an incredibly important initiative for Apple. As a company, we have for a long time focused efforts on advancing equity and increasing access to opportunity. But I think we all recognized last summer that there was an urgency and a responsibility for companies like Apple to really put a public and strong commitment behind the work to advance equity and justice. And that was really the genesis of our Racial Equity and Justice Initiative. So what we did when we launched this initiative, first and foremost, we put a financial commitment behind this work, $100 million. And that was an initial commitment. And that was to really demonstrate that a company like Apple was willing to dedicate resources behind this work. And the next thing that we did was focus on 3 key priority areas that we felt Apple could use to have the greatest impact, spaces that we knew that we could leverage our platforms, our resources, our partnerships to move this work forward. The first was education. That was a space that Apple knows very well. We have a long-standing history working in the education space, and so much of our education work has already been focused on increasing access to technology and the pathways that technology can provide for economic opportunity. So we started with our community education initiative, which has a focus on getting technology and critical learning expertise to underserved school districts across the United States. And we've really worked to grow that effort. We're also increasing our partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities, minority serving institutions, Hispanic serving institutions. We already have 34 HBCUs that are committed to serve as community coding partners for Apple. And one of the most exciting things that we did since launching the Racial Equity and Justice Initiative was to launch the Propel Center, working with Southern Company and with Ed Farm, who we have a longstanding relationship with. And the Propel Center is an incredibly exciting initiative focused on being a virtual and physical hub to empower HBCUs across the United States. And I look forward to sharing more about that work a little later. We also launched a app developer academy in the city of Detroit. And we chose Detroit for a lot of reasons. Apple has developer academies around the world, and they're focused on creating access to Apple's App Store platform, but also to upscale businesses and entrepreneurs through this platform. And we knew that if we were going to build one in the United States, we wanted to build it in a space that had a wealth of minority-owned businesses. And what better place than Detroit to do that? 50,000 plus minority-owned businesses. So we're really excited to launch the first year of that Developer Academy in Detroit this fall. In our first year, we're planning to reach 1,000 students, and we're only going to see that number grow as this takes off. Our second pillar is criminal justice reform. When you look at racial equity and justice, you cannot tackle the economy, you can't tackle education without recognizing the role and the impact that our criminal justice system has on these spaces. So we're focused on getting resources, getting technology to the organizations that have been on the front lines of this work for so long. So we're supporting organizations like the Equal Justice Initiative, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Black Lives Matter Foundation, and so many others who are on the front lines of this work. And also looking at ways for us to develop workforce opportunities and really provide access and exposure for students that can help to prevent a lot of the interactions with law enforcement that we see. The last bucket is economic empowerment. And this is a big one for Apple. As a company, we know that we spend significant resources outside of Apple in our supply chain, across professional services. And so we have some really critical goals to increase our spend with Black and Brown-owned businesses in our supply chain and across professional services. But we also know that we have strong subject matter expertise in scaling entrepreneurs. And so we have a developer entrepreneur camp that we're focused on, first of all, women developers, but we've also expanded that to Black developers and developers of color so that we can ensure that we're getting one-to-one mentorship and guidance for some of the brightest lights and best ideas in our developer community. And of course, all of this work is happening alongside the really critical work that we're doing inside of Apple to increase our hiring and retention and recruitment for people of color. And my colleague Lynn, who is here today, will share more about that work. So thank you again for having me. It's exciting to share the work that Apple is doing, and I look forward to talking more with all of you about it.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Felicia. I actually learned a lot, and I hope to get back with some questions on that because I think that's a really interesting mix of activities that Apple is actually doing. Lynn, let's pivot to you. Let's hear more about what you do in your role and, maybe piggyback off of some of the things that Alicia also mentioned.
Thanks so much, Nicole. And much like Alicia, it is a personal honor to share this space with you and this distinguished panel today. Really excited to talk about what we're doing in inclusion and diversity. So I'm a member of the inclusion and diversity team. My team is specifically focused on external partnerships, but our overall inclusion and diversity team really focuses on what we're doing internal to Apple, all across Apple, to increase representation and specifically increase leadership representation. You mentioned the term tech equity as we launched earlier today. And at Apple, our work as a company has really been around creating technology that can truly change the world. That can only happen when we have everyone at the table. This is made possible only if everyone has the chance to contribute. So we are committed as a team and as a company to applying our resources and our innovation towards helping to create a more inclusive tech sector. Alicia mentioned some of the amazing work that we're doing external to Apple. And so I wanted to just kind of really focus on what we're doing internally. We are strengthening our longstanding commitment to making our company more inclusive and diverse by hiring inclusively, by providing training and development opportunities and fostering an inclusive culture at Apple, also ensuring equitable pay for all employees. We're continuing to focus on increasing diverse representation at every single level at Apple, and to help Apple become an even better reflection of the world in which we live. In terms of some data, Since 2014, the number of employees from underrepresented communities has increased by 64% in the US, and the number of female employees worldwide has grown to more than 70%. In 2020, 43% of open leadership positions were filled by people from underrepresented communities in the US. And 37% of open leadership roles were filled by women globally. Now, I know that we're at ALC, so I do want to focus some of my commentary on what's happening in the Black community. The number of Black employees in the US has grown by more than 50%, with a 60% increase in leadership. And while we're proud of that progress towards building an Apple community that really reflects the diversity of the world around us, we also acknowledge that there's still work to do. We are focusing on creating an environment where everyone can be their whole selves, bring themselves to work, and do the best work of their lives. And our inclusive practices continue to show promising impacts on our hiring efforts. We're focused on robust diversity recruiting efforts for R&D and leadership to accelerate progress in hiring across technical and engineering and leadership roles. Now, I want to double click there for just a moment. Research and development teams are the fastest growing teams at Apple. They include everyone from hardware and software, engineering, audio, materials, even machine learning. R&D is an area where the tech industry, diversity continues to lag in general. And that is why it is important for us to continue to build great work internal to the company. We have to create strategic partnerships external to the company as well. Now, I just want to share a little bit of data, and hopefully, Nicole, we can talk about this a little bit more later. Since 2011, in order to increase representation, you really have to start to move that denominator. And since 2011, the number of Black engineers that have graduated in the US has really been about 4.4% annually. Where we have seen other communities grow, this number in the Black community has by and large remained stagnant. And that means that in order to increase representation in tech and specifically in engineering, we've got to move that denominator. And that's why we have to work with organizations like Advancing Minorities' Interest in Engineering, and my great colleague, Veronica Nelson, who's going to share with us a little bit more about what we've been doing in order to make that change. Again, all of our team members, and not just on the tech area, but certainly in the creative areas, we're not just focused on external hiring, but we're also focused on what we're doing in terms of diverse leadership. We know that that's also a powerful driver of our progress. We're committed to increasing the number of managers from underrepresented communities at Apple, and we have a particular focus on outreach efforts for internal and external candidates. I'll close with this today, Nicole. All of our team members have access to career development programs, ongoing inclusion and diversity education, and support throughout their career journey. From our new hire orientation to our talent planning and mentorship, we're always finding new ways to help our team members continue to learn, continue to thrive, and continue to advance their careers in an inclusive environment.
Wow, that was actually really great. Like I said, I'm learning so much on the panel, and I will come back and revisit those statistics when it comes to engineering, which, Veronica, I think is a great pivot to you, right? Because this is what you're doing in terms of your mission. Talk to us a little bit about, in your 3 to 5 minutes, what you do, and, maybe share more of how you actually created a partnership with Apple.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nicole. Well, again, it is truly my honor to participate in this panel to talk about this very important topic. And so again, I'm Veronica Nelson. I'm the Executive Director of AMY, Advancing Minorities' Interest in Engineering. So first I want to talk a little bit about AMY, and then I want to talk about our partnership with Apple. And so AMY was created over 28 years ago, and we were created to represent a coalition of industry, government agencies, and the A-BET accredited historically Black colleges and universities, schools of engineering, who saw a diverse workforce as a competitive advantage and an essential business need. And so AMY is a nonprofit organization. And again, as I mentioned, we work with, our purpose is to expand those corporate government alliances with the 15 A-BET accredited HBCU schools of engineering. And our purpose is to implement and support programs to help attract, educate, graduate, and place underrepresented minority students in engineering and computer science careers. So today, our partners, our HBCU partners, I mentioned that we have 15 HBCU schools of engineering. And so those 15 universities make up 3% of the over 300 plus accredited engineering schools in this country. And they produce over 30% of the minority engineers each year. And so 3%, they make up 3%, but they produce over 30% of the engineers in this country. So a diverse workforce is within reach when you create strong alliances between corporations like Apple, the HBCU, and government agencies. And AMY is the organization that makes that happen. And so we continue to act as a catalyst to forge those relationships and partnerships to support programs to advance minorities' interests in engineering. So I am so excited to talk about our partnership with Apple. And it is truly a partnership and a relationship. And so our strategic partnership initiatives with Apple are in response to the needs of the deans of the HBCU schools of engineering and AMY. And so Apple's strategic partnerships provide several items for the HBCUs and AMY. First, I would like to talk about what we call the innovation grants. And these grants help provide meaningful access to cutting edge technology. So you may have heard Apple awarded $5 million in the innovation grants to 4 institutions. And those 4 institutions were Alabama A&M University, Prairie View A&M University, Howard University, and Morgan State University. And so these grants will be used to support the universities and help them prepare their students for careers in hardware technology and silicon chip engineering. So we're very excited about that. Apple will partner with each institution to understand what their unique context and provide support and guidance and resources to those universities. And then they will also work closely with those universities to implement a strategic plan and for implementation and support in this innovation grant. And then we talk about the scholarships. And so we all know how critical scholarships are to students. And so scholarships will enable students to pursue their degrees in engineering. And so we're excited to say that Apple is giving up to 3 engineering students at each of the 15 HBCU schools of engineering a $15,000 scholarship. This will also include immersion experience and mentor opportunities. And so, as I mentioned, this is a critical need. And so many times it is not the capability of students that stop them from pursuing a degree in engineering, but it is affordability. And so this really helps us really move that needle and increase the number of engineers, minorities studying engineering. And I want to talk about faculty support. And so our deans and our faculty members often talk about faculty support. And so when we think about partnerships, we don't typically think about faculty members. So just think, if you touch one faculty member, you can touch hundreds of students. And that is so critical. So we want to thank Apple for their Faculty Fellows program. And so this is a grant up to $40,000 that will be awarded to 11 of the HBCU schools of engineering. And so this grant will allow the faculty members to design student support and development opportunities for engineering students. And this is really aimed at promoting higher engagement, retention, and graduation of the students in engineering disciplines. And it will also be used to enhance the curriculum. And our goal is to really strengthen the pathway to the technology industry. And then it will also support lab equipment, which is desperately needed at the HBCUs. And then I want to talk a little bit about the AMY grant. And so we want to thank Apple for not only investing in the HBCU schools of engineering, but investing in AMY. And so this grant will be used to provide strategic support in areas of need at AMY. And then we also, the goal of this grant is really to help us engage and retain and graduate more students at the HBCU schools of engineering. So Apple is a true strategic partner, and we have developed a win-win relationship.
Thank you, Veronica, for that. I'm sitting here taking copious notes because I got some questions for you. But the statistic that you share is so real, right? And it's one of those things that I love the way you put it. It's not that we don't have the talent. We do, we do. They are just sitting in places that you just don't know where to find us. But we're going to tell you today how you actually find us, right? So thank you. I'm going to come back to that because I'm writing down some questions that are going to be tied to, I think, a lot of the comments so far. Spencer, last but certainly never least, give us some opening remarks, and then we're going to jump into questions and answers.
Nicole, thank you so much for your leadership. I'm proud that you're a Joint Center alum. Also want to give thanks to Representatives Barbara Lee and GK Butterfield for their leadership. Also, thanks to the Joint Center's Dr. Dominique Harrison, who leads our tech work. Now, Nicole, we often talk a lot about government playing a key role in addressing systemic inequality, and certainly government has a significant role to play, but it's also important to recognize that we won't effectively address systemic inequality and anti-Blackness without meaningful leadership in the private sector. Fortune 500 companies alone have revenues that are 3 times greater than the revenues of the entire federal government. And these Fortune 500 revenues alone account for 2/3 of the US GDP. In fact, the private sector is so important that the Joint Center retained the law firm of Wilmer Hale to write a series of briefs on how companies can adopt effective strategies to address systemic inequality that comply with the law in terms of recruitment, retention, Black contractors, diversifying boards, that kind of thing. So I'm particularly excited and appreciative of Apple's leadership in addressing systemic inequality in our society through expanding opportunity in the emerging economy by investing in Black developers and HBCUs, increasing its spend and investment in Black contractors, and also investing in organizations like Advancing Minorities' Interest in Engineering. Now, I do think it's important to take a look at all of this in context. As you know, the U.S. economy has consistently been boosted by low-wage Black labor, and there's consistently been a failure to invest in the humanity of Black folks. You think about after the ratification of the Constitution, cotton produced by enslaved persons allowed the U.S. to quickly become a global superpower. It's the unpaid labor of our ancestors that allowed the U.S. to displace China, India, become the primary supplier of cotton to the world. And you know that cotton accounted for over half of U.S. exports in the first 6 decades of the 1800s. This created New England textile mills, New York financial institutions, et cetera, right? And obviously Jim Crow continued this and kept us in kind of these low wage positions. So that's why, as we think about the future of our economy, it's so important for tech to invest in Black communities. We want Black communities to play leadership roles in the emerging economy, to have agency over our lives. So the work being done by Lisa Jackson, ALISHA Johnson, Lynn Stanfield, Rob Harris, and others at Apple is key to advancing Black communities. We're thankful for Apple's partnership with our communities, and I'm optimistic that Apple's leadership in the private sector will inspire other companies to make similar investments.
Great. Thank you so much, Spencer, on that. And I hear the passion. I know the passion that Joint Center has had, in making sure that we have the right stakeholders that sit at the table. Now, what I want to do now, folks, is really sort of embrace a couple of questions. We've got a little bit of time, I think, to play around with this. And if you all don't mind, I've just been jotting down a few things. So I want to actually start with, Lynn, I'm going to start with you. And I know you've got a couple of other questions. You've been at Apple for nearly 2 decades. You've actually sought to retain talent and keep talent. I keep hearing a mix of buzzwords, though, that you all have spoken about. Hiring, social impact, partnerships, training, cultural shifts. Speak to us for a moment on why it's so important to have a combination of these things. Because we often hear companies just say, well, we're just going to hire, right? We're not going to do these other things. Why is it important to have this potpourri of activities to really proclaim a diversity strategy? So I'll start with you, Lynn, if anybody else wants to jump in. But I think, I've been just so amazed by this conversation because it's just not about diversity. It's about really making sure you have the right suite of products, services, training at the table.
Absolutely, Nicole. And let me just go on record and say I very rarely admit to doing anything for 2 decades, but I'm very proud to have been at Apple for this period of time. There are certain inflection points that I think we have to really capitalize upon when we're looking at diversity in the tech sector. Number one, that first inflection point is certainly some of the work that's being done through Reggie and with our education teams, and that is providing exposure at an early age, right? Because if you don't see it, you can't be it. If you don't know what an engineer is or a computer scientist is, how can you aspire to be there? So that work is critical, and it is more long-term. It's the long game, but it's the game that we've got to continue to play. It is so very important. Then, of course, there's the midterm opportunities, and that's partnership with Amy, and Apple also has other partnerships with Thurgood Marshall College Fund, many great non-governmental organizations that we've been partnering with over a number of years. And that inflection point allows us to continue to invest very much so strategically, right? Where we see the industry is going. Veronica specifically talked to our New Silicon initiative at HBCUs. When Apple announced the transition to the M1 chip, last year at WWDC 2020, we didn't have a lot of HBCUs that really had a lot of silicon development. So as our company is, kind of betting the farm on silicon, this is a strategic opportunity for us to bring HBCUs in the fold so that we weren't creating a barrier, right? If you don't get the requisite training that you need, then you'll never be able to enter this area of the industry. And Apple is usually, we're always on the bleeding edge. So sort of wherever we go, the rest of the industry is going to follow. So it does provide an opportunity for us to create some early pathways for HBCU students. Really, really proud of that work. And then the third component, I love the way that you described it, kind of that potpourri, is what are we doing for our talent today? So as an Apple veteran, one of the things that I think is so important is that our people it's our heartbeat at Apple. At Apple, we have diversity network associations. Now, other folks may call them employee resource groups, but our diversity network associations are truly driven by our team members. They're not business groups. They are driven by employees. They elect their own leaders. They develop their own agendas. And for more than 30 years, our team members have been able to find community and connection in our DNAs. These diversity network associations are really rooted in the celebration and the amplification of culturally underrepresented communities. They create spaces for belonging and learning and growing inclusivity. One of the beauties that I've been able to see is the allyship that we're seeing with our diversity network association. So at Apple, we have several DNAs, accessibility at Apple, amigos at Apple, Black at Apple, Indigenous at Apple, Pride at Apple. And I love the way that our DNAs in celebrating their own cultures and creating this inclusive environment, they're also really supporting, other diversity network associations as well. Post George Floyd, Black at Apple really, really activated. But you know what? Pride at Apple leaned in, and South Asian at Apple was really active, and accessibility at Apple came to the table. So we're seeing a lot more around allyship, and that's what makes it such a special place. If our people are truly the heartbeat, we're allowing them to create these inclusive spaces and environments. Those are the kinds of things that get you excited about the work. And when you're doing the best work of your life, that's the kind of stuff that keeps you here.
Mm-hmm. ALISHA, I want to come back to you. And Lynn, I'm just going to tell you this. You do not look like you've been at Apple for 2 decades. So I just want you to know that, okay? When we say that. ALISHA, talking about Lynn, I mean, she brought up the George Floyd moment, and I think a lot of what you're talking about in your remarks was around centering racial equity too when we talk about diversity and inclusion. That's a different time frame, and I'm really happy to hear that Apple is not just creating employee resource groups, or really creating, I think, this activism, this corporate activism that we saw come out of the George Floyd experience. Talk to people about why that's important, right? Because that's not a traditional way of looking at inclusion by centering racial equity and social justice as part of those initiatives. Give us some background on, as we go forward, we have these continued conversations on D&I and tech equity, why we also need to solve these other problems, because it's going to matter in the long run.
That's a fantastic question. And Len set this question up quite nicely in talking about the work that Apple is doing internally. I think as a company, we recognize that we have these very robust internal goals and that it's important for Apple to reflect the world and the tech industry that we want to see. And so as that work is happening, we knew that we also couldn't miss the opportunity to have an impact on this world outside of Apple, building up a broader, more inclusive tech sector, whether these are people that are going to come into Apple or whether they're going out into the world as entrepreneurs to other companies, even our peers. So we really saw this as an opportunity to ensure that through these three pillars that I laid out, education, criminal justice reform, the economy, that we were resourcing the organizations, the groups that have been on the front lines of this work for so long. Through education, I mentioned we already had such a strong foothold through partnerships that we've already been engaged in. And so we saw this as our opportunity to really grow and scale that work around things that Apple does well, around coding, around software development, around even the creative arts. That's one of the things we're doing through the Propel Center. How can we empower, how can we resource HBCUs and really scale up their curriculum to create this inclusive sector? In the criminal justice space, that is a space where there have been so many advocates and activists who have given blood, sweat, tears, toil to this effort. And that's not a space that Apple's going to come in and tell these groups how to do what they do. They are the experts. What Apple can do is say, we have funding, we have platforms that can amplify, and we have resources, we have technology. How can we use all of these to better the mission that you know so well, to advance that work? And so we view it as critically important. We view it as something that is not just a part of this moment. It's not just June of 2020. It is an enduring part of Apple's work. And I mentioned June of 2020 is not the first time that we thought about this work. We've been long at work looking to advance equity. In June of 2020, we put a name around it. We put an umbrella around the work. But if you go to apple.com right now and look at our values at the bottom of that page, racial equity and justice is in that list. And that is just one way that we're demonstrating that this work is here to stay. It is going to be integrated into all that Apple does in the same way that education, our environmental initiatives, so many other values that are important to us as a company are ingrained and prioritized.
Yeah, I love that response, because I think it goes back to, you can get people into the building, right? But you often can't get them to stay if they don't feel that their lived experiences are reflected. So it's really this extension of, not only the emphasis on social justice, but the allyship, because people, that matters, right? I know at Brookings, we had to tell people, George Floyd's death mattered in a think tank. And so I think it's so important that you actually continue to do that. Veronica, I want to come to you in just a second, but I have to go to my dear friend, because I know he is a graduate of an HBCU, and that would be Spencer. In fact, I'm not going to put it past you all. Anybody else on the call graduate HBCU? Because I don't want to I just got to make sure. Veronica, what school did you go to?
So actually, I graduated with my master's in engineering from Howard University.
All right,
I have to give props to the two other HBCUs. So I have my oldest son went to school for mechanical engineering at Prairie View A&M University, and my youngest son is currently studying computer science at North Carolina A&T State University. So proud HBCU love. Thank you.
Yep. Rob Harris, I know, who also is at Apple, is an HBCU person. Don't catch him on a bad day when the team is playing. All I gotta say is this. My dad went to Howard University. Is a whole other story about, how we land up in the schools that we do, but we're not going to talk about me right now. But Spencer, I want to talk about you, because I know you actually tell a really interesting story about, one, what support you got to get to Hampton, and then when you were Hampton, what it provided to you. I want to do that because I want to contextualize for people just how important it is that we're seeing this initiative cleave to an HBCU, and then I'll jump over to Veronica to talk more about the engineering gap.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think this investment by Apple and HBCUs is so important in terms of, institution shaping people, and it not just being about one or two individuals, but, investing in institutions. For me, when I got to Hampton, I had not done all that well at kind of an integrated suburban high school. And, Hampton allowed me to be my whole self. Some people suggest an HBCU is not the real world. I actually think it is the real world that most people deal with, because I didn't have to think about race every day. There are a lot of people, most people in the world, or at least in the United States, aren't thinking about race every second and how to navigate it. And I could focus on my work and, getting better and just growing as a human being. I could play leadership roles, and obviously HBCUs play an outsized role in terms of producing leaders. So I'm very happy about the investment. I do want to, make one other point, as we were talking about this and kind of policy and Black folks, right? The app economy is important, and Apple plays a critical role in terms of the app economy. The Joint Center did some research on Black businesses and apps, and we did it before the pandemic, but it's still informative. NICOL, 90% of Black businesses have websites, but we found that only 16% of Black businesses have an app, even though a disproportionately large percentage of African Americans have access to the internet via smartphone rather than home broadband, right? And then now another part of that is that smartphone apps consume about 50% of all users' time online. So that's their online time, not just on their smartphones, but on desktops, laptops, tablets, that kind of thing, right? Now, in our study, some Black businesses without apps said that they didn't have apps because they didn't think apps are relevant to business, right? Their business. But there are apps for various types of Black businesses. Just 7 sectors account for 54% of all Black businesses, and all these sectors have apps. Beauty salons, janitorial services, home health care, barbershops, childcare, landscaping services, et cetera, right? And there are different types of apps for small businesses. Some of them are customer-facing apps that we're all familiar with, that customers use. Some are single-function apps like QuickBooks to manage accounting. There are multifunctional apps like a beauty salon app that allows customers to book and pay for a hair appointment, and also allows the salon owner to track work hours of their stylists and manage payroll and track inventory here. So this app economy, I just want to note, is incredibly important. There are some opportunities in terms of Black businesses here. I just think Apple plays a key role in it. And we have to just kind of focus on the economy, the future of the economy, and where it's going.
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually like that point, because that was my part B, Spencer. So
okay, I'm sorry.
You answered the question. No, it's all good. But I like that point, because when I think about my book, which is coming out this fall, Digitally Invisible: How the Internet is Creating the New Underclass. When I ask people what they thought of the internet, they often thought it was one of these apps as opposed to the internet itself. And so there is a conversation that needs to be had on how do we get more people of color to actually utilize these apps. And I just read your piece on that, because I think it's so important for us to realize that the internet ecology is so much more vast.
And just like you said, this association of the internet with apps, some people may say, well, my website is, smartphone, friendly, right? But like 88% of time people spend on their smartphone is on apps. So even if it's mobile friendly, even if your internet site is mobile friendly, there's still a role for an app.
That's right. And that's part of tech equity, right? Because that goes back to everything we spoke about. Who is sitting at the table making these apps? Before, when the Congresswoman and Congresswoman Lee and Congressman Butterfield put this together, I remember it was a workforce challenge. Now it's a content challenge. And Veronica, that leads me to you. I mean, my engineer in my house is 14 years old, because we've been doing all this Zooming, and I have no idea what I'm doing half of the time, even though I actually write about tech. How do we get more people of color, more students of color, more girls of color to actually want to go into the engineering field, because as we're hearing from Spencer, this is not just a pipeline to a job. This is also a pipeline to entrepreneurship.
Exactly, exactly. And when I look at that, that is a very important question. And when I look at it, I'm an engineer by my background, so I try to come up with simple but complex equations. And so I always say it's like, I'm gonna call it A cubed plus R. And so when I say A cubed, it's awareness, it's access and affordability plus resources. And so when we start thinking about students, number one, we have to make sure that students are aware of engineering careers and opportunities. And many times we assume they are. They may know about it, but they don't make that connection. It's not something that's very exciting to them. Okay, and so I could use my children as an example. I exposed them to STEM their entire lives, but I never made that connection for them. And so through programs like NSBE SEEK program, Summer Engineering Experience for Kids, through summer camps at the local universities, through STEM programs at corporations, that really kept giving them access and exposure to those programs. And it really lit a spark inside them, okay? And then also, if we want to make a difference and increase the number of students going into engineering, we have to make sure that the parents are aware. And so not only do we educate the students, we have to educate the parents. And so I would say the one thing that happened with COVID is it really gave us access to virtual resources, okay? And so now we don't have to go to a local university. We can have access to those resources virtually. And then another way that we can increase the number is stop tapping on the same 1 to 10% of the students. And so we continue to go to those students that are going to the STEM academies or STEM universities or have honors programs, but we forget about those percentage of students that I call that's going to a public school. They're in a comp class, but they have a desire and an aptitude for math and science, but they're like diamonds in the rough. And so no one has really invested in those students to really bring that out of them. And so I think we can increase the numbers that way. I look at myself, I was a diamond in the rough. My children were diamonds in the rough. But again, somebody took the time to really polish us and expose us to those things that were available. And then again, affordability. And so we can increase the STEM pipeline, but once the students get to college, if the students and the parents do not have funds, they are not able to attend. And so we lose a lot of students that way. And then the last thing where I said plus resources, I talked about those 15 A-BET accredited HBCU schools of engineering. Many people have no idea who they are, who those 15 schools are. And so if people followed the same path as Apple and really got the opportunity to learn about those schools, the programs they have, the research capabilities, and invested in those schools, then we can increase those numbers. And so we have to stop going to the same institutions, investing in the same institutions, and expect to make a change, because we can't. So those are some of the small things, I would say low-hanging fruit that we can do in order to really change that paradigm, make a paradigm shift and increase the number of students going into engineering.
Yeah, I mean, if I was about to say something, I was going to say preach. Okay, I thought we were in church. So when you were talking about it, listen,
I'm so passionate about that.
You are coming down my lane and then some. I will put some money in the plate, because let me tell you why. The statistic already tells us for Black boys who actually are not engaged in math at a very early age, probably before 6th grade, I believe it is a statistic, that they tend not to go into math majors for high school. And those Black boys tend to go into college, and if they're not interested in math the first couple of years, they don't graduate with a math degree. And we spend a lot of time trying to encourage our young people to do that. As my mother would say, you count money, don't you? Then you know what math is. But we also face, right, that other narrative, which is you're not good at math. Tell my daughter all the time, when I grew up, my mom used to say I'm not good at math, and I learned to say I wasn't good at math. And so when it got to her, she tried to say she wasn't good at math, but we're going to break that right now. Right?
Exactly.
So I think that is so important. It goes back to what Spencer talked about. The environment in which you actually cultivate those resources makes a difference. True. And that leads me to this question, right? Because at the end of the day, it makes a difference, because we need people to be able to be in these industries to have products and services that reflect our lived experiences. Right. ALISHA, I'll jump to you, and then Lynn, I want to jump to you. Why is it so important that we have this inclusivity and diversity so that these products that are coming out, these algorithms that are coming out, these apps that are coming out really reflect the experiences of the people who are not often, represented in these fields?
Absolutely. And I know Spencer probably has a lot of thoughts on this, but that is 100%, you hit at the heart of it. You cannot have tech that is serving everyone if it isn't developed by everyone, if there aren't inclusive voices at the table that are developing these products and these services. And we find that the more inclusive we are, the better product that we have. And so that's something that we've been striving to do by working with these entrepreneurs who have amazing apps through our entrepreneur developer camp for Black developers, for women developers. How do we ensure that these developers, those who are doing this really innovative work, have access to the same resources, the same funding that their predominantly white peers have had who are out here doing these things in the space? We also are looking at doing that through VC funding, something I didn't touch on earlier, where Apple is focusing specifically on VC firms that have a mission to fund entrepreneurs of color. So we've done that through Vamos Ventures, which has a specific focus on Latinx entrepreneurs. We've done that through Harlem Capital and Collab, which focus on Black and Latinx developers. And all of this is in service of ensuring that we can look at the products and services that we are developing, that we're supporting, that we're partnering with, and that they reflect what we view as the world that exists and also the world that we want to see.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, thank you so much for that, ALISHA. A great example of bringing your best self into tech and ensuring that everyone who is sitting around the table is creating products and services that are reflective of who you are and where you came from. Great example of that at Apple is the Memoji, right? The opportunity to create a Memoji that looks like you, down to skin tone and glasses. And so really gives you an opportunity to personalize it and make it yourself. But if you don't have a lot of people sitting around saying, are we being mindful of this, right? How can I make my own Memoji? We don't make this type of progress. And so it is so important in the creative area at Apple, in the engineering area, in our AI ML, that is key to ensure that we are reflective of the ever-changing, diverse world, and we're bringing all of that into the company.
That's right. And Lynn, just if I can stick with you for just a moment on this, talk to us again on why it's so important when we talk about diversity, that it's not just about having a seat at the table, right? It's having a plate set too when you're at that table. As a person who's in the hiring space, why is it so important that we start to position those placements, right? So that people can actually give voice in the environments in which they're in.
Absolutely, absolutely. So two words that I think are really important here, and that is leadership matters, right? And so having great leaders that champion this work, that have specific expectations for us to create a more inclusive environment is key. One of the things that we're doing at Apple is we absolutely listen to employee feedback. We amplify underrepresented voices. We're taking action to ensure that we're meeting our team's needs. Every single line of business has a diversity and inclusion action plan. Every single line of business has an IND action plan at Apple. And that ensures that all of our leaders are accountable. Our accountability measures across the company really allow us to track progress and build a foundation for lasting and durable change. And so that is really important. And I get excited about this. So Nicole, I don't know if I really even answered your question, but I had to say, having leaders that really focus on this and ensure that it is embedded, inclusion and diversity is embedded all across the company, various factors is really, really key. And that's how we ensure that it becomes policy, it becomes practice, right? It's not just something that's bolted on for the time being, it is a part of who we are. It is truly a part of our company DNA.
Yeah, no, I only ask that as a researcher myself. It's always so interesting to hear well, we've hired this many people, and then you find out that they're not in critical decision-making roles. And we all know on this panel that when you have people who look like you in a decision-making role, they tend to think about you and they tend to hire you, right? And that's the most important thing. They feel comfortable with you. And so I think what you're talking about, that leadership part of it, that focus on areas where D&I is part of every vertical of the business, I think is really key. Now, Spencer, we've been talking about companies, but government has a lot of work to do, and they've been doing a lot of work. Congresswoman Lee just put out a bill, Computer Science for All, which is encouraging STEM participation, particularly for underrepresented groups. Congressman Butterfield has had a series of bills, I know, in hearings that are actually talking about diversity in tech. When you think about the role of policymakers, where do you think they fit in ensuring that these narratives that we're speaking about today get addressed?
Yeah. Policymakers obviously have a critical role. There have been a lot of great innovations in terms of, industrial revolution, but then there's some negative byproducts when we think about, for example, climate change or other things, right? And there's a role of government in terms of stepping in. So, variety of issues right now in terms of platform accountability. When we talk about Section 230, we talk about privacy protections. I know Apple is very strong on privacy, but privacy is obviously key. But one thing that is critical in this moment is ensuring that everybody has access to home broadband that's quality and high speed. You have been just a leader on this issue, NICOL, and you know better than I do that Black families disproportionately lack home internet. And this infrastructure bill is an important part of that. I mean, unfortunately, the traditional discussion leads with the fact that internet is unavailable in rural areas. And the poster person for that is generally the white rural person, right? And in fact, many more people lack home internet because it's unaffordable, right? And occasionally people talk about that issue and think about Black folks in metropolitan areas. Black folks in rural areas, though, are really hit here. They face the challenge of both unaffordability and unavailability here. And too much of the debate has overlooked Black folks in rural areas. Dr. Dominique Harrison recently found that 38% of Black households in Black rural areas, the Black rural South, lack home internet. That's compared to about 22% of all rural households outside of the South. So the infrastructure bill is important because it deals with availability, affordability, and discrimination in redlining, all of these things that, like I said, you have been a real leader on. And, certainly, obviously, smartphones are incredibly important in terms of giving people access, but we also want people to have access at home to, a landline connection, as many people as possible.
Yeah. Well, Spencer, thank you for also those compliments. But, I went to the HBCU of the think tank world, which is the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. So I was able to actually start my career there. I just want to sort of pick up on what Spencer's talking about from the standpoint of we do have policies that are out there. And I think the Congressional Black Caucus in general has been very supportive of the infrastructure bill, which is going to provide universal access of workforce, which we're actually going to see, I think, coming out of the Labor Department, many more apprenticeships and entrepreneurial opportunities. We're going to see this diverse tech startup community really raised. And I like what Alicia's talking about because it's finally recognized that they matter. But I want to stick to this education piece while I have the Apple people. Because I did have the opportunity as part of the Connected initiative where Apple is one of the key players to go out and visit some of the rural South communities and other communities in which you actually have this program. And I think everything we're talking about matters, right? Not just tech equity for the standpoint of getting more bodies into workplaces, but tech equity in terms of moving the needle where young people need to stand. One profound area that I visited was an Apple site in rural Marion, Alabama, which was one of my first real visits to the South. I know you like, how Black women not go to the South? I was born in New York, okay? Transatlantic slave trade took me to Queens, somehow between South Carolina. But I share that because Apple has paid attention to those educational initiatives. So I'd love to hear from, in our remaining time, Alisha, Lynn, and Veronica, just how important the educational investments are when it comes to HBCUs, when it comes to making sure people have equipment, when it comes to addressing equity, when it comes educational inequities. So ALISHA, I'll start with you.
Thank you for that question. I've said it a few times today, but education is just so central to this work for so many reasons. And I think the first one is that for so many students, this is the first opportunity that they have to view what's possible. And so we view this as an opportunity to demonstrate from the very earliest ages what the landscape could look like, what careers are possible. We hear the phrase all the time, you can't be what you can't see. We have a tremendous opportunity to represent to students, to the future generation, the possibilities for their future. And so we view technology as a wonderful way to do that, to open up exposure to experiences, to places, but also as a way, an equalizer, a way to ensure that everyone is starting from the same playing field. And so we can do that through initiatives like ConnectEd, which after that program sunsetted, we transformed to our community education initiative that's got that same focus. How do we get to the most underserved school districts and get resources and technology, but also ensure that the educators have the resources to integrate that technology into their lesson plans, into their curriculum in the most effective ways. And one of the things I really love that Apple has done is to make champions out of these stellar educators. They have come to Apple when we were in an in-person space, and we're now doing this virtually, to become champions, to take that learning back to their school districts and to really share and evangelize the best ways to really amplify that technology. And so that's work that we feel so proud of, that we see such opportunity to grow. And it's been wonderful to be able to partner with Lynn and her team as we find ways to really grow and expand this work. And I'll hand it over to Lynn, who I know has got a lot more of learnings and thoughts here.
Thanks so much, ALISHA. You know, Reggie is doing so much great work at Apple. And I often think, you know, it would take a leader at Apple to wake up one day and say, how do we fix systemic racism, right? How do we remove those barriers? Because it's so big and it's so deep. But we've been intentional around education, that very same intentionality. We've been very intentional around education for many, many, many years. And you referenced the ConnectEd story. One of the things that I think is really interesting, and this directly connects to what Spencer was sharing with us earlier. In 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone, and in 2008, we opened up the App Store so that folks like me and you could create an app if we wanted to do so. One of the things that I think is a pivotal game changer is Apple created the Everyone Can Code curriculum, which is freely available. What that means is truly now folks like me and you can learn how to code. The reason I shared with you the opening up the App Store is because between 2008 and 2018, according to the ACT App Economy, $1 trillion industry, let me say that again, $1 trillion industry was developed. Now, tell me any other industry that was developed in 10 years on very, very low margin, what, roughly $1.99 average, right? There is none. And so making this curriculum freely available really eliminates all of the barriers, right? Because now you can't say, well, I don't know. There's great opportunity for learnings. And so education has been at the core of our DNA at Apple, and equity, right? Because that's exactly what Everyone Can Code does. Equity is at the core of our DNA as well. So a lot of really, really great work. And I'm really excited to see where we're going to take the story next.
Mm-hmm. And Veronica, I want to pass it over to you because you've sort of been brought into this culture, but you've also brought them a whole lot, right? In terms of your background and experiences. Just as people who are listening, just, you know, sort of close us out. And then Spencer, I promise I got one more general question for everybody, okay? Because I don't want, you know, there's a lot of estrogen in this panel, and it's not, you know, it's not only by accident, okay? Sometimes you got to have more women on the panel. But Veronica, you know, how do we get more partnerships where they have this reciprocal relationship that we actually are hearing from in this panel?
Thank you. And again, I want to thank Apple. And so I think the first step is I can't wait until this panel discussion is broadcast to everyone so they can see the amazing things that Apple is doing. And so many times you feel that you're doing great things and you're doing it for a small group, but when you just start to listen to all the amazing things that Apple is doing, and I like when ALISHA said you can't be what you can't see, and when Lynn started to explain, what has happened over that 10-year period, no one else has done that. And so again, Apple sees the value in investing in the community. They see the value in investing in the HBCUs. And I want others to reach out to Apple and ask them, what's your secret sauce? What are you doing? And for you to share that so that everyone can do that. And I believe it takes a village. And so we can no longer work in silos. We have to share the best practices and we have to share the lessons learned so that we could truly make a difference.
I was actually going to say, I don't think they want to share that too much because Lynn is not going anywhere after 2 decades. And, ALISHA got to stay where she's at, okay? So
Okay.
don't put that out there.
Look, share
Lynn and I are a package deal.
A portion of it.
You did not hear that, Lisa Jackson, on this panel, Well, and I want to, Spencer, kind of leave with you. And I think we have just a few more minutes and then anybody who wants to chime in with this really big question. Clearly, what we heard today, my friends, is that Apple is doing amazing work when it comes to diversity and inclusion, but we want every corporation to do amazing work when it comes to tech equity. This is about really closing these gaps that exist between the pipeline, when people are actually employed in these spaces, and ensuring that they have a seat at the table in the most important conversations, which are the differentiation of the market in terms of products and services. Spencer, just and for everybody, I'll just kind of do like a wrap around in these last 5 minutes. When you think about some key priorities that we need to have in place going forward, is like the number one thing? Because I think the Congressman Butterfield and Congressman Lee would love to hear where do they continue to take this initiative next?
Yeah, I think holistic, right? There's not a silver bullet. This problem has been around long before us. And it will survive us, unfortunately. And that doesn't mean that the work we're doing is unimportant. The fact that this wasn't solved during Frederick Douglass's lifetime doesn't mean that he did not have meaning and that he was insignificant. He was very significant. So it's a holistic problem. And so we have to focus on various areas. Part of that is education. Part of it is also, though, entrepreneurship and wealth building. As you probably know, a study was done showing that the typical white household headed by someone without a high school degree had more wealth than the typical Black household headed by someone with a college degree. And so skills are important, degrees are important, but there are various things that are on the table here that we've got to focus on. So being holistic, selecting our lane and figuring out what our contribution is going to be. And I'm so thrilled that, that Apple has really honed in on its target and its contribution toward this systemic problem.
Lynn, I'll go to you.
It's a collaborative effort. We can't do this work by ourselves. It's going to take corporations leaning in, working with government, working with education, working with great non-governmental organizations like Amy and many, many others. This is very, very deep work. It is wonderful work. It is work that we're all passionate about, but it's a lot. And no one company or government or NGO can do it alone. So I think it is having a degree of humility and willing to sit down at the table with everyone and figuring out the best strategy to move forward.
Veronica?
So I just want to piggyback on what Lynn just said. And then also, what all the panelists just said. And so there's not a silver bullet. And so, but again, we have to all come together and work together. But the one thing we have to do is we have to do a shift in our strategies, what we're currently doing. And so if we continue to do the same thing that we've done before, we're not going to make a change. And so what is that? The definition of insanity. And so I would like to make a plea for the HBCUs. They are what I call our national treasures. And so we need to invest in those HBCUs just like we do other institutions and give them the same type of resources if we ever want to make a a change or a shift in this paradigm.
Mm-hmm. And ALISHA.
Everything that Spencer, Lynn, and Veronica have said are just, I completely agree. And I think it's absolutely right that we have to change the way that we do things. I think one of the ways that we can do that through our economic empowerment pillar, building up the next generation of entrepreneurs, people who will then be making hiring decisions and investment decisions, building that generational wealth. That's one key way to really change the demographic of power. But it's also something that I believe corporations need to be humble, to Lynn's point about, is that what we can bring are resources and our platforms. We have a megaphone that we can use, and we should be doing that to amplify the voices that have been overlooked for too long. And so if we can continue to do that, to center the communities, the innovators, those who have been developing these solutions, that's when we can really start to change the landscape of power and those who are actually driving the solutions and the decision-making going forward. And so I just want to echo what everyone has said. The folks who are on this panel, our sponsors, our co-hosts, are all really working to be that change. And I'm just honored to be able to share this piece of the work that we're doing and to be a part of this tremendous panel.
Yeah, no, this was excellent. Look, I would have to say this in support of the ALC, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation always strives to be the platform. And so this conversation that we had today is going to be broadcast among 2,000 to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 plus people, really trying to help them understand what we need to do as a community to sort of move forward. Because I love what everybody says. I had an old boss once say, when you look at the history books, you have to decide if you want to be part of the past history or you want to be part of the new chapter. Just which page do you want to be on? And I would say for all of you, we want to be on the right page or the right side of history. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to our esteemed panelists, ALISHA Johnson, Lynn Stanfield, Veronica Nelson, and Spencer Overton. I appreciate you and thank you for participating. I also want to thank our co-hosts, Representative Barbara Lee, as well as Representative G.K. Butterfield, who are out there doing the tremendous work that is needed to move the needle forward. To our sponsor, Lisa Jackson at Apple, and the two people behind the scenes that you cannot see behind the pixelated screen, which are AJ out of Congressman Butterfield's office and Rob Harris at Apple, who has a long history on the Hill. I think him and AJ are sort of brothers from another mother. With that being the case, I want to thank them for actually inviting me to moderate this distinguished panel. I just got back from vacation, so if you see a little bit of a relaxation in me, that's because I am. And I can tell you, I'll never take a break from these types of dialogues and these types of conversations. So continue to follow the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, stay abreast of the activities that Apple has, and tune into the activities that are part of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's Tech Equity Initiative. There's going to be more announcements, I'm sure, as we come back from recess to really talk about, we're back from recess already, but there'll be lots of conversations and activities going on with that initiative. With that being the case, the last thing I would say to all of you who have watched, the charge is out there to do more. Don't sleep on this, because tech equity is as important as any other civil right that we have out there in the society. So continue to press forward. Thank you again. I'm Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee from the Brookings Institution. I'm the director of the Center for Technology Innovation. You can follow me on Twitter, and I appreciate all of you for your time. Thank you.